Salve galera do Headbangers News! A gente aqui do site teve a oportunidade incrível de entrevistar a banda Khemmis, especificamente o vocalista Phil Pendergast, sobre o novo álbum que eles vão lançar agora, no dia 12 de junho. Álbum auto-intitulado Uma Pedrada de Doom Metal para vocês. Então, confiram aí a entrevista. Valeu!
Hey,
Hey
Fernando.
Phil, nice, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
It's a
Can
pleasure
you hear me
talking to
okay?
you. Yeah.
Good.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Nice to meet you again. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So, now you're releasing next month the self-titled album from Chemist. How would you explain the themes behind the album and the lyrics in the album?
Yeah. I think overall, the intention with the record was to just reconnect to our shared joy of like getting together in a room and playing heavy music and just seeing what comes of it. Um, and so the record is like kind of like a meta commentary on that to some degree. It like is a record about the creative process. So the record is like a concept album. It's telling a story the whole time, but the concept is really based on like the idea of making the record. So just like filtering it through some more ridiculous lens than like an autobiographical telling of that would be. But basically, it's like if we imagine that creativity looks a lot like demonic possession, in that it's something we invite into our lives and we're seeking something from it, and it sort of takes control of us and makes us have to put down our guard. It makes us sometimes abandon other responsibilities that we have. It makes us have to cede control to its creative power, and then we're sort of bestowed with this product of the possession that we kind of barely understand and that sort of exists outside of us, but is also a reflection of what we've given to that process. And so the record is like literally that. And I just thought that that was also a cool concept then for a story, that the story can just be about like this person who is being driven mad by this desire to create this thing, and so it invokes this spirit to inhabit him, and then it shows him all of the parts of himself that are keeping him from being able to give fully into this control, and he has to sort of like give in to this power in all of these different aspects of his life, causing him some amount of harm and destruction, but also clearing the way for this thing to materialize. And then by the end of the record, we find that he basically just sort of immerses himself fully in this thing and just becomes the music. So it's sort of this like positive conclusion to this story, but it's also like complete destruction of ego and loss of self through the process. And this is how I feel every time we make a record. I'm like, who even am I? And what did we just do? And I'm a little bit scared about what this means, but there's also a lot of beauty in it. Um, and so, yeah, it's really just an album about the creative process, but like viewed as this sort of ritual that we all engage in to try and access it. And then what happens from there.
And as you said, it's something more about you as a band. Does that mean that was the reason the album is self-titled, called Khemmis itself?
I think it's related. I mean, I don't think that we set out to have like a self-titled album. And I don't think at any point while we were making the record that we thought about this would be a self-titled record. But I think on the other side of it, like after giving ourselves into this process, seeing what the result is, we all felt like this was a really honest expression of who we are as a band. and maybe the best expression of like our desires for the band this whole time since we started, of just sort of fusing like all aspects of metal into this one unique vision that we have for what we want to be doing as a band, ignoring any like subgenreification, just purely sort of trying to create heavy metal in like a 70s Judas Priest sense, where it's kind of like anything goes and it's all just about trying to embrace what's badass. Uh, so it does that for us. And the other part is that we have like a new member in the band, and that they added so much to the dynamic of creating the record and of our personal relationships with each other, that like it feels like it's a reinvention of the band in that regard as well. So introducing Dave Small as like this new force on bass to be reckoned with all these moments throughout the album where we're really spotlighting what he's doing, and then him like bringing creative ideas to the table songwriting wise that influence the direction of the record. It really just felt like in pretty much all possible ways that it made sense to call the album Khemmis. It still represents what the album is about as a one word title, just like all the past ones have been. Um, so it doesn't break from tradition there, but it felt like kind of a bold move to say, you know, this is really us. This is what we've been trying to do this whole time.
And having a new bass player, you said, changed the way you work in studio, or you compare it to the previous records, especially the Seaver. Did that change much the way you work in studio in production and with the producer?
Yeah, I think it definitely did. Like in terms of the album's sound, it dictates a lot. Um, you know, there's the bass is way louder on this record than it's been on any of our other ones. It also like occupies a more unique space in terms of what it's doing musically than it has ever before too. So, you know, a lot of the time I think the default for us has just been to have the bass follow the guitars. Like it's a pretty guitar centric band, and so it makes sense to do that. But I think that the thing that Dave is doing that's unique is like more on the songwriting front than on the production front. He's bringing an understanding of how to use the bass to bridge the drums and the rhythm section to the melodic content with the guitars. So really like bringing an understanding of how to lock in with the grooves that Zach is doing in a way that can be independent from the guitars, and then also that can provide this bridge to where sometimes the bass is the thing that's melodic, sometimes the bass is the thing that is like spelling out the main melody along with the vocals, or it just opened up like more tools for us to use both in the studio and in terms of songwriting. So he's had an influence on all of those aspects of the band.
Okay. Uh, Being a self-titled, and the first EP from Chemist is also a self-titled. You don't worry about people mixing up the two records when like searching for on Spotify and stuff like that.
Sure. You know, I honestly didn't even think about it. uh, well, the first EP to me is so insignificant in terms of like what the band has become and what it represents in our discography, that like it does. I just don't even think about it at all. As far as I know, that album isn't even available on Spotify
Oh,
or anything. I think it only really exists the EP like on YouTube or stuff like that. So um it might exist out there, but I'd hope that nobody's going to confuse the two. You know, one is a full length album, one's an EP.
okay.
They're more than 10 years apart. Um, an immediate like reaction to the production quality between the two should signal what the newer entry is. You know, I think that EP served a really important purpose in our development as a band, to be able to like book shows, for instance, and give us some experience with working in a studio. But it's not something that I see us like putting out a version of on vinyl or anything at any point. You know, it's kind of served its purpose, and like more or less, I want this new album to be the definitive statement of what like Chemist as an album represents for the band.
But you don't want to re-record that EP or maybe some older stuff like the way you do now the things? I mean, it's something
Hmm.
many bands do around.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at some point. It doesn't feel super high on my priority list. I'd rather just like keep making new creative things that are like more ambitious and that make me feel like we're stretching ourselves creatively. I think there's probably a place for that at some point, but those songs don't really speak to me that much anymore beyond the bereaved, which we already did a much better version of on Absolution. Uh, so, you know, I'm sure that there are people who would like to see that at some point, and maybe we would if we were going to be going into the studio anyway to record something else, like maybe some covers or something. You know, I could see that being like a good use of studio time, but it wouldn't be high on the priority list. We're kind of a forward thinking band. We're usually not trying to sort of take stake of where we've been or repeat ourselves. So, you know, it's sort of in the band's ethos to more just like focus on what the next thing is rather than going back and celebrating that past.
And now, you personally, if you
Mm-hmm.
would should choose one song from the new album to show someone who doesn't know the band, which one would it be?
Yeah, I think it would be the first track that we put out for the record and the first song on the album. I think Invocation of the Dreamer is like both unique to this record in terms of like it has a dark melodic angle that is kind of unique in the Khemmis discography. Like the melodic language of that song is darker than what we usually have gone for in the past. And so it's satisfying in a unique way to this album. And I also think it's like kind of a good entry point to the band because it has this like really aggressive opening push that might hook people who are into more extreme metal. But then it's also very melodic. It has kind of like a thrashy main riff. There's cool, like kind of atmospheric psychedelic sections of the song as well. It kind of does like all of the things that we try to do as a band, but distills it down to this 4.5 or so minute package that I think is pretty digestible to most people, probably fairly memorable, and just like speaks to who we are as a band in a way that no other pint sized version of the band would be able to speak to. So it's a good entry point for chemists, for the average person. And you know, other than going to something like way more long form, I think probably the ideal entry point and representation of the band in 2026.
Okay. Uh, and about the front cover from the album, uh, all albums are the front covers are hand drawings and very beautiful drawings, not to mention. Uh, how exactly is the process of creating these pieces of art that you do in the covers?
Yeah. So this has always been one of my favorite aspects of the band is the creative process behind like deciding what the visual accompaniment is for the music and then working closely with artists to make sure that we're capturing that in the way that I'm sort of like envisioning. And so our first four records all had Sam Turner's amazing illustrations, which are um, really inspired by like Frank Frazetta's work and this sort of like classic fantasy art that would be on paperbacks like from Tor Publishing or whatever in a bookshop that you also saw like permeating 70s rock to some degree. Like all of us in the band when we first started the band together and when we were thinking about like what does the album art look like for Absolution when we were recording that, we all shared this memory of like sitting in our front of our dad's record collection and holding these albums and like just poring over them as a kid and saying like, man, that was so badass. That Molly Hatchet album cover looked so fucking cool. It's too bad that the music wasn't quite tough enough to match up with it. And so we've all like embraced the idea of like, what if that was kind of the aesthetic and the music maybe was a little bit tougher. And so that is definitely part of what has always motivated us. And then like the way that each album plays out in terms of like the story that's being told has always kind of been dictated by like a combination of the lyrical themes and like an overall storyline and like world building going across all the albums with repeating characters and like themes and a storyline that's sort of slowly emerging. And so anymore, like while we're working on a new record, I'll be like coming up with a short story that pertains to the characters from the album art and includes elements of the theme of the new record, and then work with the album artist on like incorporating that story into what's going on with the art. So for this newest album, we're working with a new artist, Christopher Remmers, because I really had the aesthetic of like classical oil paintings from like the Italian and Dutch masters in my mind when we were making the record. Like I could not get the texture of oil paints out of my mind when we were finishing the production on the album. It felt like aesthetically like the right match to the material. And so we were working with this amazing painter to create the record, and we were just like incredibly collaborative about the process. It was really fun to work with him on this because he doesn't have any background in heavy metal at all, but he has done some work for like Magic the Gathering, for
Ooh.
instance. And so he has like that ability to think about things from this kind of fantasy lens, but his wheelhouse is really more like realism and kind of esoteric and like magical like realism. And so rather than trying to get him to do something that he doesn't really do, I just thought it would be really fun to work with him on doing what he does well, and then just like giving him themes to work with that made sense, both for the continuation of the story we're telling across these albums and for the, representing what this album is about. So the new record, if you're looking closely at the cover, it has a lot of cool symbolic stuff that pertains to themes on the album, also like hints as to how this connects to the storyline across all the artwork, and lots of little hints about like sort of me and Chris as people. And we like really tried to kind of like include elements of ourselves in this work. So I think it's a really fun piece of art. I think it represents the album really well. And I feel really proud of how every aspect of the packaging came together between his art, the calligraphy that Daniel Hermosia did for all of the lyrics. And there's this ridiculous art piece on the inside of the gatefold for the LP that is like this insane rambling story that I wrote that he hand drew as this like crazy piece of visual art. And I think all of it like just makes the album more interesting, more esoteric. Everything feels very intentional and like reinforces the themes and everything about it. It's just like a very cohesive work. So I feel really proud of that.
And those details are something that AI could not ever
No,
create.
no,
So,
absolutely not. I get so mad when I see that people are like, this is AI. And I'm like, it's fucking not. you know but that's just I can't fault people for that being the reaction that people have anymore. Like so many people are just passing off work as being AI these days, and it's a really sad reflection of where we're at. If people think that that's how we have to like commercialize our human existence anymore, I can promise people that we will never ever use AI for any creative aspect of the band ever. It's antithetical to our understanding of art, of how that's an expression of humanity. And you have our solemn fucking promise that it will not ever be a part of the Khemmis language of creativity. Um, yeah, it just really bothers me.
yeah, because in journalism you see too people
Yeah.
using AIs for text. I find it so It pisses me off.
Yeah, you can tell. And it is like almost everything now is so homogenous because it's being produced that way. It's just like there's no humanity or soul to anything that I see these days for the most part. So you got to cherish those little places where you can still find some of that humanity. Like we can't lose sight of that. That is our greatest gift as people, is that ability to tap into that unique lens for expression. You have to hold
Yeah.
on to that.
And so, your musical genre, the more doom metal stuff, is kind of more popular in Europe than it is, for example, in the US. Being an American band, did you find it more challenging for you to find your place in the market than you see what happens in the European market?
I have no idea because I don't have another experience to
Oh,
compare it to, So to me, like the US has embraced us really like immediately, especially once we put Hunted out and we had all
mm,
kinds of cool opportunities to be doing stuff. And I feel like we're a well regarded band over here and we draw reasonably well on tour. And um, like it's really just felt like home and there hasn't been another place to compare it to. And it's
okay.
only more recently that we've been able to be going to Europe. And so um, my perception is that we're much less popular in Europe, but partially it's because we haven't been able to go over there as much. But I do see what you're saying that, like, in general, that style of music is more popular in Europe. But I think that there's also limitations to that. Like, I definitely know that I've had interactions with people in Europe who are like, it's not really Doom. And I'm like, yeah, we never said that it was. And then, so people kind of like form expectations, I think, a little bit more about genre in Europe than in the US. And here it's maybe okay that it's just like, yeah, that's heavy metal. Then it's kind of like heavier and slower sometimes and has dark lyrical themes. So it's Doom. Um, that same like ability to just be fine with like whatever it is is a little bit rarer in like Germany, for instance, or something. So I don't know. There's upsides and downsides to it in both places. I'm glad that we've been finding a place in the European market because I think people understand us as a band more now. But definitely, I think the fact that the band has a lot of different stylistic influences, I think maybe initially kind of confused people and like made it a little harder to get a footing there actually.
Okay. And now that you mentioned that you've been touring more now, and you also have already a tour booked both in the US and Europe.
Yeah.
For this tour, do you want to record a live album or maybe filming any shows for release it in video?
We haven't really thought about it yet. If I'm being totally honest, we almost always do record the shows. We've never really done anything with that, but just the front of house sound guy that we travel with, he always records the shows and then he uses that to continue like refining the mix as we're like moving throughout the tour. Because he's a really hardworking guy. So he'll be in like the back of the van, like listening to the previous night's show and like making little tweaks to EQs and stuff, and then like try and make it that little bit better the next day. So I know that we have the material to do that kind of thing. Um, I think probably I wouldn't expect unless we were playing something like really special and unique that we would do like a video thing. Just because we this last year in December we played an Absolution 10-year anniversary show in our hometown in Denver, and we did film that show with like multicam footage and recorded it, and so that'll be seeing the light of day at some point I think later this year. So we're already going to have like a cool concert sort of document coming out, so I don't want to like do too much of that. But if, for instance, we were doing something cool like playing Pompeii or like, some huge festival that had a really cool stage or whatever the opportunity might be, like, yeah, we would definitely try and coordinate something around it and think about putting that out. But sometimes it adds more stress than is like necessary to do that when we're on the road. And so sometimes it's about just trying to give people the best show in the moment that are at that place at that time as possible. And then kind of not, you know, if you want to see it, you have to come out.
And but you still don't have anything booked for South America, right? That you can advance us.
No, not yet. I really hope that that comes together on this album cycle. It's always been something that I know we've all wanted to do. Same thing with Japan and Australia and New Zealand. Um, but the logistics of touring in those places is makes it difficult. I mean, it's so much more expensive to
Yeah,
get there
you
and then travel
you
around.
have to you have to travel by plane here. There's no
Yeah.
such thing as tour buses and stuff
No.
here.
No, so it really takes quite the investment from promoters to make that happen. So
Yeah.
I know that we're all down to do it if the numbers come together and support that. But we're still just waiting for that opportunity. I hope that's something we can do though, on this album cycle because I really would love to get down there, play places like in Brazil that we haven't been able to go before. It's kind of a dream of mine.
It would be an honor to have you here. Uh,
If we make
so
it, you have to
just
come out. I'll hold you to it.
just one last question. Could you tell five bands that influenced Khemmis in from the start to now?
Yeah. I think for me, number one kind of origin point is always going to be Judas Priest. Those early Judas Priest records to me are kind of like the secret to unlocking the full potential of heavy metal. They're so agnostic to like any genre definition other than that that they're heavy metal and that they're fully embracing that label for the first time really of any band, but they're so creative with it. So that stuff to me is always super inspiring. Halford is my favorite vocalist. The twin guitar stuff is like amazing and some of the best in the whole genre of all time. So Priest, Priest or Maiden, I love both of these bands, but if I can only pick one of them, it's always going to be Priest for me. Um, let's see. I think another one would be Merciful Fate. For everybody in the band, this is like a common touchstone melodically, in terms of how we try and think of melody for the band, having that like almost like neoclassical kind of element, this like harmonic minor kind of movement through a melody, and like almost this sort of theatrical approach to songwriting. We don't like get overly theatrical in the same way that King Diamond does, but that sort of sense of grandeur and sort of like triumphant, epic kind of quality of songwriting is something that we aspire to. So, and instrumentally on all fronts, all of us are influenced strongly by the players in Merciful Fate. So that would be a big one. um, I might also shout out Celtic Frost. Uh, in the
But
same
not Cold
way,
Lake.
no, boo, Cold Lake. Uh, I think we all basically have an appreciation for these like inflection points in metal where there's a band that's doing something in the same way as I was talking about with Judas Priest, where it kind of like defies convention until it creates convention. And Celtic Frost sits at that sweet point of like the explosion of extreme metal where they're just like playing around in the muck and the mire of like the darkest versions of heavy music that exist at that time, and then creating something with such a like strong primal connection to like everything that you want to hear from heavy metal, the like aggression and the sort of ritual, the like sort of magic of giving into that dark side. And so those early Celtic Frost records, especially for us, like it'd be another point. That's three, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
guess four because there's Iron Maiden that you mentioned
That's
too.
true. Okay. I'll talk about Iron Maiden for a second. I think in terms of like perfecting what we know as just like heavy metal, Iron Maiden does that. Like they have always been strong, just like proponents of the riff, very catchy songwriting, great vocal performances. And in terms of live bands, I think are like almost impossible to beat. So amazing. We've all seen them a handful of times now, and every time that we see them, we're like, man, we have to get better. And so heavy, Iron Maiden is just like a huge heavy metal influence. I'll also, from like the artwork standpoint, like we were talking about earlier, they're like one of the only other bands that I really think has stuck to being able to tell like a kind of narrative with like characters through their artwork, where it has like the second that there's an Iron Maiden album, you know that Eddie's going to be on the cover, and you like want to see what adventure he's getting up to. Um, that type of like world building that you associate with the band is something that we've always strove for. So both kind of imagery wise and music wise, huge touchstone there. So I only get one more, huh?
Yeah.
Oh shit. I might shout out like either Yob or Neurosis.
Hmm.
Um, both of these bands are, I think people would be surprised to know that Khemmis, on the whole, doesn't really listen to a whole lot of Doom. Um, both me and Zach have a strong appreciation for like Candlemass and Paradise Lost and, um, like these bands that are sort of like are strictly Doom. But one thing that everybody in the band agrees on is that the emotional weight of Yob and Neurosis and the ways that they perform Doom so that it is like such an expression of the spirit of the people that are making it. It feels so honest. Um, and that there's a great catharsis to listening to those bands, is something that we all try and bring to this band. So in terms of kind of like emotionally what the band stands for and is trying to do, I would say there's kind of a tie between Neurosis and Yob there for me, of that both of these bands are doing this same thing, um, the best way that heavy music is capable of expressing the soul and the spirit of the people making it. These two bands are doing that, and we try and do that ourselves as best we can.
Okay.
So you
I
got
guess that
six.
will, yeah. That will be all. Thank you, Phil. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. I appreciate it.
I hope I can see you here in Brazil sometime.
Yeah, if we do, you have to come say hi to us, okay?
Oh, for sure. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good day.
You too.